Hi, I'm Kettisha Walker of Kettisha Walker Realty. I am your host, coach, narrator for this program. I am very excited to be here with you to share this great information with you to add to your real estate tool bags. So I hope you have your pen and your pads ready. Today we're going to talk about real estate professionals, who they are and what their roles are in a real estate transaction. We're going to talk about buyers, sellers, client prospecting, and the real estate code of ethics. So without further ado, let's get started. The who's who in a real estate transaction. Who are the professionals involved in a real estate transaction? On the buyer's side, you have the buyer's agent, the buyer's attorney, and financing professionals. The buyer's agent. The buyer's agent is the individual who, by contract, protects the best interest of the buyer. The buyer's agent shows the buyer properties. They submit offers on the buyer's behalf. In addition to that, they keep the buyer in the loop of any information pertinent to the transaction to ensure that the buyer's needs are being met and their interest is being protected. The buyer's attorney, similar to the buyer's agent, also works for the best interest of the buyer client, but from a legal standpoint. The reason why I point out a legal standpoint is because we want to make sure that if there's any questions about contracts or anything legal, that as agents we are not answering those questions. We're not authorized or are we licensed to give legal advice. So anything outside of the scope of real estate, we are to refer those buyer clients to either the attorney or the home inspector or whoever the professional is responsible for that area of expertise. We want to be very clear about that. Financing professionals. The financing professionals can be anywhere from the loan officer, the mortgage broker, the mortgage lender, basically anybody involved with the financing of the subject property. That's who the financing professionals are in a real estate transaction. On the seller side, we have sellers agents, we have sellers attorneys who, like the buyer side, protect their clients' best interest in the same manner. So if you're working with sellers instead of buyers, the responsibility is the same, but instead it's to the seller instead of the buyer, of course. We have individuals like the appraiser, the home inspector, an insurance agent, sometimes surveyors, title company, and sometimes even transaction brokers. So who are these folks and what role do they play? They're not really on either side, but they do have clients, and we're going to talk about what their role is to their client. The appraiser. The appraiser's client is the bank, the lender. What their responsibility is coming into a property and assessing it, condition, the market conditions, and comparing it to properties in the area to come up with an overall value for the property. Why is this important? I'll give you an example. Let's say that your buyer client makes an offer on a property and offers $300,000. What the appraiser does is those things that I spoke about. They come in, they look at the property, they look at the market conditions, they compare it to those in the area of similar shape, style, size, and they say whether or not this property is valued at $300,000. And if it is, fine. If it is not, the bank is not going to give a loan, is not going to finance a property that is not valued at the amount that they're lending the buyer. That's why it's important that the appraiser comes in and gives a fair assessment of the property for their client, who is the lending institution. The home inspector. A home inspector also comes in and evaluates the property, but from a different perspective, a different angle than what an appraiser does. The home inspector comes in and they're looking for basically structural soundness. They identify any repairs, replacements, they do termite inspections. They test the water. They do radon tests. They do those types of things looking for soundness, safety issues, anything like that that can affect the condition of the home, and they prepare a report. The report is basically the buyer's first introduction to the property. They go through every nook and cranny of the home. The buyer should be present during the home inspection, because if there's any questions about the property, a good inspector is going to be able to answer those. They'll tell you the age of the furnace, the windows. They'll make recommendations. They'll tell you things that are safety issues that should be done now versus things that, could use a little updating later. That is what the home inspector does. What the home inspector does not do is say, based on this report and the old windows and the busted pipes, the home is valued at this much. That is not what home inspectors do. They solely look at the condition of the home and prepare a report based on their findings of their inspection. That is it. The insurance agent, much like an agent that you go to for car insurance, this basically writes policies to protect the property in the event of any damage. So banks, lenders, they require buyers to have insurance on a property prior to closing. They want to make sure that from the very beginning that their property, their investment, the buyer's property is protected in the event that there's any loss or damage or anything to that property. So that's what the purpose of the insurance agent. They facilitate the transaction and getting insurance on the subject property. Surveyors. What surveyors do? Surveyors are typically involved in purchases of lands, but a surveyor can come in and basically they assess property. They'll look at they give a legal description of the property, and they also tell where the exact boundaries are. Why is it important? If you buy a property, your buyer buys a property, and it says it's 5 acres. You want to know where your 5 acres start and stop. That's basically what a surveyor does. They assess the property, they give a description of the property, and they give the exact boundaries. That's what the surveyor's job is in a transaction if a surveyor is used. Some people get surveyors after the fact, before they put up a fence or something like that, just to ensure they're not putting the fence over on the neighbor's property line, things like that. But that's the surveyor's function. They come, they give a description, and map out boundaries. The title company basically protects the buyer and the sellers, the banks, and what they do is they come in and make sure that there's no adverse actions, and that when a title transfers from a seller to the buyer, that there's no liens, there's nothing going on, and also that the seller has a legal right to transfer the title. The seller has a legal right to to sell this property to whoever they're selling it to. They do a title search, and they basically, anything that's about the property that's not known, it will come up. So you want to make sure that they check to make sure that prior to the title being transferred from one person to the other, that there's a clear title. If there's any liens, sometimes, the seller may have to take care of those liens, or sometimes they don't want to take care of them in some transactions, and they'll say, listen, we're selling it with the liens, and the buyer will be responsible for clearing those liens or fines or whatever it is. But that's what the title company's function is, to come in and uncover those things that may be swept underneath the carpet. A transaction broker, not all transactions use transaction brokers. Transaction brokers typically work together with the real estate agents, not so much directly with the buyers or the sellers, but they act kind of as the middle person with ensuring that things, in terms of the transaction, move smoothly. So that it may be anything from, paperwork, preparing contracts, those types of things. And most times they are real estate professionals because they may have some duties that involve having a license, but that's what transaction brokers do. They kind of do some of the administrative stuff on behalf of either, the buyer side team or the seller side team. And that's what their role is, kind of facilitate the transaction. That's kind of what their title alludes to. Working with buyers. Where are you going to find your buyers? Any and everywhere. You can find your buyers anywhere, from the doctor's office to work, to the soccer game, to the hair salon, to the nail salon, to the auto body shop. Anywhere you go is where your buyers could potentially be. A rule of thumb is that, what I do is, any conversation that I have with someone who does not know I'm a realtor, or who have not, come into contact with, I find a way to bring up real estate, even if it's just giving them a card. They may not be looking to buy or sell at that present moment, but if you have a decent conversation with them, you seem pretty relatable, you seem pretty professional, you seem pretty pleasant. Who knows if they know anybody or they know of or themselves are ever ready to do a real estate transaction. You want to be that person who they come to. You want to be the person who they think about when all things real estate. So that's where you find your buyers. Anywhere that you are is where your buyers can potentially be as well. How do you communicate with your buyer? Why is this important? And what ways are there to communicate with your buyer? We can email, we can text, we can pick up the phone. You want to find out which way does your buyer want you to communicate with them. How does your buyer client want to be contacted? Why is it important? One, when you ask the question, it shows your buyer client that you have an interest in them. You want to meet their needs. You're trying to learn more about them, and you want to meet them where they're at in whatever way kind of works best for them. And throughout the course of the transaction, it becomes a lot easier when you know how you should be communicating with them, especially when you talk about time frames and needing a response as soon as possible. You don't want to be in a situation where, you're texting your buyer or you're sending them an email and there's someone who doesn't check their emails but once a week. Time is ticking, and if you have deadlines to meet, you want to make sure that you are communicating with your buyer in the most effective manner to get that fast response and in a way that they want, in a way that they appreciate, because they may get turned off if you keep texting them. They may say, why didn't this person just pick up a telephone and call me? I hate text messages. So you want to make sure that once you establish that you're working with them and all things are going fine, how would you like for me to communicate with you? What's the best way for me to communicate with you? Ask the question. They'll definitely appreciate it. Is your buyer a customer or a client? This is very, very important. In other situations, maybe other professions, we can use these two words, customer and client, kind of interchangeably. You don't really want to get caught up doing that in a real estate transaction, and here's why. A client is someone who says, through a written agreement, a contract, I am working with you. These are my responsibilities and my obligations to you. And you are saying to them, I am working with you as well. And these are my responsibilities and my obligations to you. In a client relationship, you two have committed to the relationship of working together in a real estate transaction. It's written. And although, it's both signed off on, either party, both you or your buyer client, can end the contract at any time. But it is a written agreement, and it's saying we are agreeing to work together, and this is the contract binding this agreement. A customer, not that you don't owe the customer certain things. The customer could be someone who you're kind of talking about real estate with, but there's no commitment. They're maybe calling you every once in a while to pick your brain about real estate questions. And of course, you want to be honest with them. You want to operate with them in a professional manner. You want to, have some integrity with the interaction, but there's no commitment. You're not committed to them. They're not committed to you. There's no contract in place binding you together as there is with the buyer client, where you more than likely have the buyer representation agreement, or something along those lines. Someplace the verbiage may be different, but the idea is there's a contract in place saying I'm working with you and you're working with me as well. So that's the difference between a client and a customer in a real estate transaction. Is your buyer pre-qualified or pre-approved? Nothing in terms of working with buyers can be the first point before we get in the vehicle and start shopping for homes than getting this question answered. And if they're not pre-approved, you want to make sure that you're able to assist them. You want to point them in the right direction. You want to tell them how to get that process done. But what you're not doing is physically going out and seeing homes with a person, a buyer, who is not pre-approved. And let's talk about the differences. A pre-qualification is kind of a rough look, so to speak, of a buyer's credentials to purchase a property, to get a mortgage. Sometimes they may run a person's credit, but a lot of the information used in pre-qualifications is information provided by the buyer. And the letter will read so. Based on the information you provided, And then somewhere down, the bottom of the letter, sometimes it'll say, you still have to submit, and it may say, W-2s or proof of income or proof of assets and all those things. That means that the bank gave this person a letter based on the picture of themselves that the buyer presented. That's what they're using to pre-qualify that particular buyer. That is not what you want to go shopping with, and I'll tell you why. A pre-approval, when you get pre-approved, the bank has looked at their assets, their income, their taxes, their debt. They've turned this person virtually inside out financially, and says that based on an assessment, a full assessment of those items that I just mentioned, this person is more than likely to be mortgageable for this amount. So it's not, I love homes and I want this house so bad, I'm going to paint this pretty picture and tell a bank that I earn $100,000 when I earn 40. It is the bank verifying my information through a pre-approval process that is going to give me the letter that I want, that you want, before you go out shopping with the buyer. We are not going out on a pre-qualification because if for whatever reason your buyer goes and makes an offer on a property, and then it turns out that, once they submit the loan application officially, the information they provided was not factual and it doesn't pan out, that home is now going to be the benchmark for everything that the buyer wants. You're never going to be able to show them a home that's going to meet what they want, because that home is the benchmark. So you want to make sure that you're not wasting your time, the seller's time, anyone's time, or getting anyone's getting false hopes and potentially ruining the relationship by not making sure that you properly vet that buyer. You want to tell them, and sometimes they'll say, oh, I was waiting to do that until I found a home. You want to explain to them, part of your responsibility is client education. You want to explain to that buyer that, no, you need to be pre-approved, and you need to be pre-approved for these reasons. You want to make sure that when we go out and see these beautiful homes that are within the price points that the bank is willing to lend you, that if you see something that you want, we can submit this offer with a strong financial backing, saying, with the bank saying you're pre-approved, have a higher rate of getting your offer accepted, and when your application goes to the bank, it's more than likely going to go through, versus now you have to provide all of these documents for the bank to now review for the first time. You want to be pre-approved. You want your client to be pre-approved, and like I said, you educate them on the reasons why and let them see how beneficial it is to them. You want to make sure that, same as if you're going to the mall. You don't go to the mall without checking your bank account. You don't go to the mall without checking to see how much money you have in your wallet to spend. It's the same premise when going home shopping. We're not going home shopping not knowing how much the bank is going to say is in your financial wallet. How much is in that mortgage wallet before you go out, shopping for a house. You need to know, they need to know, and you need to convince them and educate your buyer that this is the way, that is the first step to ensure that they get what they want. What does your buyer want in a home? That's very clear, cut and dry. What do they want? 2 bedrooms, 5, whatever it is. And a reason why we want to find out what they want, going back and continuously going back to the education piece, is you want to make sure that your buyer is realistic. If they say that they're looking for, they're pre-approved for whatever amount, but what they're looking for is absolutely realistic, you want to have that hard conversation. You don't want to continuously drive around town knowing that nothing that you send them, that you take them to, is going to meet that mark. You may have to tell that buyer, listen, I know that's what you're looking for is 25 acres and 6 bedrooms, but you're pre-approved for $200,000. So maybe we can't get that right now, but let's get you something, that meets most of your check marks to make sure that, they're not searching for something that, realistically is not going to happen. In a real estate transaction, what you want to remember is you are the subject matter expert. You want to educate your buyer to make sure that they know, what the market is calling for, They know more than likely what they're going to be able to get within the price range of their pre-approval, and you want to work your absolute hardest to make sure that most of their check marks are met when it comes to their home purchase. That is your responsibility to the buyer, and you want to make sure that they're comfortable in their decision. You don't want to force things on them. You want to make sure that you tell them everything they need to know, so that when they make that decision and when they're out shopping, they're not reaching for the unreachable star. We're going to move on a little bit and talk about working with sellers. Your sellers are the same place where your buyers are, wherever you are. Anybody who stands still long enough for you to have a conversation with them is your potential buyer, is your potential seller, is your potential, next client on either side of the transaction. So again, you want to make sure you keep those business cards everywhere. If you got several pocketbooks, put them in there. You got 5 wallets, put them in there. You got the shirt jackets, your shirt pockets, put them in there. Several vehicles, put them in there. Anywhere you are is the same places that your potential buyer or sellers are, and you want to be sure to have your information readily available to pass along. So again, all things real estate, they're thinking about you first. They have that card and they're going to call you and get that relationship started. You want to be able to be that person for them. How will you communicate? Exactly the same. Have the conversation. Do I email you? Do I text you? Whatever works best. However, you want to understand that there are certain things for sellers and buyers alike that you need to have the telephone call for. You need the face-to-face interaction. When you're working with sellers, it involves, listing their property, which involves money. People get very serious when it comes to money. So you want to be able to provide them with information, clear information in a forum or in a setting that facilitates an open communication. You want them to be able to ask you questions as they arise. You don't want to send information and then, because sometimes through a text or through whatever, things get a little bit twisted in interpretation. So when you're working with sellers, and buyers too, I guess it's important. You want to make sure that you're clear in your communication. And if you feel that something's getting lost in translation, you want to have the face-to-face, person-to-person, or, on a telephone to ensure that what you're saying or what they're saying is received as it's intended. Communication is essential. It's very essential to any transaction, especially when it involves spending or, receiving money. Seller clients versus customers is the same exact premise. You don't want to, you don't want to get caught in a situation, let's just say, where, you're performing all of these seller's agent tasks and you're not the seller's agent. You want to make sure that you're clear. The only time when you would do things a little bit different in terms of sellers is if you're prospecting for the listing. Because then you're going to do the CMA, you're going to do certain things, to kind of tell the person, listen, I know what I'm doing. You want to convince them that you're going to work your absolute hardest to sell their property, to market their property, and get them the highest dollar they can possibly get for the sale of their property. So, you do a little bit more on the customer side, when you work with sellers, but you want to convert them as soon as possible. You want to give them your information, show them why you're the best, win that listing, and then go from there. You want to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward, you're honest, you show that you're very knowledgeable, and that's how you work with, your sellers. And again, you don't want to spend too much time in that zone performing agent duties for a customer. You want to be very clear. And like working with buyers, you also want to have the conversation. Are you already working with the realtor? Are you already working with the realtor? You need to ask. And sometimes it feels a little bit funny, gets a little bit repetitive, but nothing is worse than putting in work only to find out this person is already working with someone. Because then you can get into some gray areas where there may actually be some financial repercussions on the behalf of that buyer or that seller for breaching the contract that they have with that other professional. You want to make sure, again, educate, that you are having the conversations and making sure that they know what it is that's going on. They know what their responsibilities are. As a professional, you, the realtor, that is your responsibility. That's, there's no other way around it. You have some buyers or sellers who think they know everything, they know your job better than you. You need to ensure that, you're not assuming that they know. You're not hoping that they know. You're not uncomfortable to say. You need to educate your buyers and your sellers. It is part of your responsibility, whether if they're clients, customers, education, transparency, honesty, operating with integrity is always paramount. You want to be confident with with your sellers when asking personal questions. Now, you're probably sitting there like, what is Kettisha talking about, a personal question? I'm not asking anybody a personal question. When you're working with sellers, you might be, and your buyers too. But let's talk about the sellers for a second. When you're working with your sellers, when you're talking about potentially pricing up their property, you need to ask them, which can be very uncomfortable, how much do you still owe on your home? Are you up to date with your payments? Is your property in jeopardy of being foreclosed? Why? Because that would dictate how you may have to list that property. Because if they're in jeopardy of losing their home through foreclosure, instead of a regular listing, you may want to consider something like seeing if they can get approved for a short sale, or if they owe, if they took a second mortgage or they owe, whatever, $200,000 on their home, you want to be able to say to them, according, to the market or whatever, I'm not really sure if your home is valued at $200,000, and explain to them what that means if for whatever reason their home is not appraised for what they owe on their loan. So those questions are very personal, very uncomfortable, and you need to be confident in asking them. And you ask them, you get the response, and if it makes it easier for you, you can say to them, just to ensure that I'm valuing your property properly and that you get the best deal possible on your sale, I need to ask you a couple of questions, some of which may be uncomfortable, some of which may seem personal, about your finances or the financial stability of your home, of your loan, of your mortgage. That way, they kind of brace themselves to what's coming. And, you may feel a little bit more comfortable and at ease now going forward with those questions because you've already given them the fine print, so to speak. You want to be confident in asking those personal questions. The last thing you want to do is end up with a seller who's, selling their property, and for whatever reason, things fall short in terms of, let's just say, the amount of the appraisal is for. And now at that point, you're saying, well, you may have to do this or you may have to do that, because they may say, well, why didn't you tell me that? I didn't know that. You never want to assume somebody knows. You want to go into every situation, every interaction, not being rude. Not to the point where someone feels insulted, but you want to go in as if you're starting everything with every client, real estate 101. You want to assume that they know very little and you're teaching them what they need to know to get to this transaction. Because again, as I said 100 times probably already, you are the real estate professional. You guide them where they need to be. You give them what they need to know. You teach them what they need to know to ensure that their transaction closes smoothly and that they're well aware of everything every step of the way. That concludes Real Estate Basics. Please feel free to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Please also view our other videos to include pre-screening buyers and sellers, client prospecting, offers and negotiations, and clients for life.